Serving God among unreached peoples, it's not easy. The reason they're lost and unreached is because they're difficult to reach. I think in the end, it is not love for the lost that keeps you there as much as love for God who sent you to the lost. My wife and I were with Adventist Frontier Missions for about 25 years.
Our best friends, Mark and Ani Scalzi, as the first missionary couple, and so that's what my heart's desire was, to go join them. John had no interest in joining them. He wanted to do his own project. So
the truth, though, is that when we were invited to go to Papua New Guinea, I didn't even know where it was.
It was the last place in the world I wanted to be by myself. I wanted to go where Mark and Ani were, so they set the course for me, and it wouldn't have been so hard. And so it took me a long time to adjust to New Guinea.
I felt like, that God would care for us and protect us. When I made my first trip to May River, though, I really began to question the wisdom of taking my family into this environment. Moving my family of my wife and 3 boys at the time, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and an 18-month-old, deep into the jungle, 180 miles from the nearest road, 270 from town. I'll never forget the day we first arrived among the Iwam, just standing on the bank of the river.
Seeing the remoteness of the people, I was not prepared. They were all covered with the skin fungus, the ringworm. I didn't know their language.
Many were, half naked.
I didn't want any of them to hold the kids, and just wondering. And then the malaria, we'd heard malaria was endemic. We had the medicine that we'd started taking prophylactically, the chloroquine, but just the worry about the sickness and what would happen if something happened to us there.
Our senses were on overdrive.
I had my 15-month-old in my arms, and then my 3-year-old, I held his hand as we walked up the hill, and it was pretty overwhelming. I just had to say, God, you're in charge. I don't have any choice. I'm here, and you're going to have to lead us.
My father was a 5-pack-a-day smoker and an alcoholic. We lived in a very abusive home. Even while my dad was smoking 100 cigarettes a day, he would put his finger into my chest and say, if I ever catch you smoking, I'll beat you to within an inch of your life. I smoked that night. The next day, my dad was killed. And so my 14-year-old brain simply said, God killed my dad to punish me. So it just set me up for years and years and years of attempting to earn God's approval through my behavior. And maybe at some level, honestly, being a missionary was part of, a process of wanting to be approved by God.
I was very emotionally, the way I was raised, the way they tried to get us to do good was to shame us. And so I was always told throughout school how ugly I was. And so I always had this picture of God that I was on the outside looking in, that everybody else got the best. So I just always felt like I didn't deserve anything. And that's why I guess I went partly because I just felt like this is my lot in life. I'm a second-rate citizen. And so it just took me a while coming back when we finally moved back to States and counseling and some deep inner healing work with God. And I was able to receive healing from that, realize that God loved me, and He didn't shun me and leave me on the outside looking in. But those years in Papua New Guinea, it often felt like that. A couple years in, our son, Chad, by this time, he was the middle son. He was 6 years old. And he kept getting malaria. We'd learned, as soon as you get a cold or a fever or something, you just treat for malaria, because the longer you wait, the worse it gets. And even if it wasn't malaria, we just decided it was better to treat for it. And so we'd been treating him for malaria. He kept having these fevers, but it was different. This time I knew something was different. And so they arranged for us the next chance to go out. A plane came down and took us up to the Sopas Hospital in the Highlands. They did an x-ray that he had an enlarged ureter and he would need an operation in the States. AFM was just a new organization. They were pioneer stage. They had no care for missionary women at that time. It was just very patriarchal. And they said, well, John can bring 6-year-old Chad to come to the States and get the operation. And so that was the hardest thing I've ever done. to send my 6-year-old boy to the States with his father, and I knew I couldn't be there if he had to have an operation. And I just prayed my heart out that God, somebody out there is going to know that our whole family needs to go and be part of this, and we'll raise the funds for us. But, for a couple of years, I really felt like God had let me down. Pioneers often have to, do the hard work, groundbreaking. And so that was the hardest thing that I've ever done, was to let him go.
The fact that we were immersed, deeply immersed in this tribal group without others around us. Our first 2 years we were there alone. It's inevitable if you're leaning into that you're going to develop love and compassion and empathy.
If I'd never done that, if I'd never gone overseas, if I'd never done the hard work, I would never have experienced the joy of reaching another culture. At the end, when we left, the people said to us, because we tried so hard to become like them and to learn how to be like them, that they said, John and Belinda are just like us. The only difference is that their skin is white and we're black. Just the relationships we got, and just the broadening of our worldview from the narrow, rigid, far-right religious upbringing I'd had, very conservative, to just learn. It just opened my eyes to a bigger world. It opened my eyes to a bigger God.
Serving God among unreached peoples, it's not easy. The reason they're lost and unreached is because they're difficult to reach. Sometimes they're resistant. Sometimes their circumstances, like ours in New Guinea, were primitive and remote and just so costly to be there, so hard to be there, separated from family and friends. So I think in the end, it is not love for the lost that keeps you there as much as love for God, who sent you to the lost. We go to the lost and the struggling and the broken and the suffering because God longs for these men and women and children in some of the most difficult places on earth to be restored to his family. And the way they get restored is by a human agent going to be the heart and the voice of Jesus to people. And it just put me on a whole different worldview than I'd had of the rigid, just obeying God because you have to legalism that I had grown up with, to experience God's grace and experiencing him in new ways. When you think about the question of why go, why go give up your life? Why go to remote peoples? Why go to resistant peoples? Why go to unreached peoples? I think for me, the worth of it all comes down to the last night I was in Papua New Guinea. After the crowds had come and gone, I was sitting alone on the hill, and then this man by the name of Ani comes out of the shadows. And Ani had been my right-hand man. He'd been with me through every adventure. We hugged and we cried, and then finally Ani, he takes my hand under this moonlit night on the top of that hill along the May River in Papua New Guinea, and he said, "John, when Jesus comes, I'm going to take your hand and we're going to go into the kingdom together." And that moment I live into. That moment, no suffering. It all pales in comparison to that.